The sharp click of expensive dress shoes against marble flooring announced Victor's arrival before I saw him. I didn't look up from my laptop screen where quarterly projections glowed back at me. Projections that would make any CEO proud, though. Technically, I held no official title at Hamilton Custom Furniture. My brother's reflection appeared in my screen, his tailored suit a stark contrast to my casual button-down and jeans. The contempt in his eyes made my fingers pause over the keyboard. "The board meeting's been moved up," Victor announced, his voice carrying that familiar, patronizing tone he'd perfected since childhood. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Not that you need to be there. Dad and I have finalized the succession plan. A familiar tightness formed in my chest, but years of dealing with my brother had taught me when to react and when to observe. I saved my work and closed my laptop, finally meeting his gaze. "The succession plan requires all shareholders to sign off," I said quietly. "Including me." Victor's laugh echoed through my modest office, the same office I'd used for 8 years, while transforming our family's struggling furniture business into the thriving enterprise it was today. "Oh, Layla," he said, shaking his head. "Always playing at being an executive. Dad's decided it's time for Hamilton Custom Furniture to have real leadership. Someone with vision." He adjusted his gold cufflinks, a gift from our father last Christmas. Someone who didn't waste their time getting a useless art degree. I allowed myself a small smile. "Interesting. You should probably check the shareholder registry before the meeting then." "What's that supposed to mean?" His smile faltered slightly. Stood, gathering my materials. "It means I'll see you in the boardroom in 20 minutes. As Victor stormed out, I took a deep breath and glanced at the only personal item on my desk. A photograph of my mother and me in her workshop, sawdust catching the light around us like halos as we bent over a half-finished mahogany table. She'd been gone 11 years now, but her voice still echoed in my mind. "Patience, Layla. In business as in woodworking, knowing when to reveal your hand is everything." Today, that moment had finally arrived. The boardroom of Hamilton Custom Furniture had once been my grandfather's workshop. When we renovated the headquarters 6 years ago, I'd insisted on preserving the original wooden beams and installing the conference table my mother had designed before her death, her last creation, crafted from a single massive walnut slab, with the tree's natural edge intact. Board members were already seated around it when I arrived, Victor and my father at the head of the table, huddled in conversation. My father, Richard Hamilton, looked up as I entered. At 63, his once imposing frame had begun to stoop, and his signature beard had gone completely white. The smile he offered me didn't reach his eyes. "Layla, you're here." "Good." He gestured to an empty chair near the far end of the table. "We were just getting started." "Actually, Dad, I think I'll sit here." I set my portfolio down next to Victor in the chair reserved for the CFO, a position that had been vacant since Diane Reynolds left 3 months ago. The move was symbolic, but symbols mattered in our family. Victor's jaw tightened. "That's not your seat, Layla. Why don't you just— Let's get started," I interrupted, opening my portfolio. "I believe we're discussing succession planning today?" The board members, 4 longtime family friends and 2 venture capitalists, who'd helped finance our expansion 5 years ago, exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew what was coming. Most of them, anyway. My father cleared his throat. "As you all know, I've been planning my retirement for some time now. Hamilton Custom Furniture has been in our family for 3 generations, and ensuring its continued success means putting the right leadership in place." He slid a thick folder to each board member. "After careful consideration, I'm proposing that Victor assume the role of CEO effective next quarter." I accepted my copy of the proposal without comment, though my heart hammered against my ribs. 8 years of work, of salvaging our family legacy from the brink of bankruptcy, reduced to this moment. Victor has an MBA from Wharton, my father continued. He spent the last 3 years learning every aspect of the business and has demonstrated exceptional financial acumen. What my father didn't mention was that Victor had spent those 3 years primarily in our New York showroom, hosting champagne receptions for interior designers and architects, while I'd been at the factory ensuring our master craftspeople had the resources they needed to maintain our reputation for excellence. Victor hadn't spent a single day on the production floor. Couldn't tell the difference between walnut and cherry if his life depended on it. I'd like to review the financial projections for this transition, I said, keeping my voice level. Particularly the 5-year strategy for our custom commission business, which currently represents 60% of our revenue. Victor's smile was razor thin. The board has already reviewed the complete strategy. It's all in the proposal packet, though some of the technical details might be over your head, Layla. Technical details? I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. You mean like the fact that our lead time for custom pieces has decreased? From 16 weeks to 8 under my production reorganization? Or that our customer retention rate is now 93% compared to 62% before I implemented the client relationship management system? Numbers anyone can achieve when they're handed a cushy internal position by their daddy, Victor shot back, his professional veneer cracking slightly. Some of us had to prove ourselves in the real world. The real world being the investment banking job he'd quit after 18 months because the hours were too demanding. The job our father had called in 3 favors to get him in the first place. I think what Victor means, my father interjected, is that the succession plan includes a valuable role for you too, Layla. We're proposing you continue leading the design and production teams as creative director, with appropriate compensation, of course. Of course, a title with no real power, no voting rights, no equity stake. Just enough to keep me around because the master craftsman respected me and might walk if I left. Before we vote on this proposal, I said, reaching into my portfolio, I'd like to distribute an alternative succession framework for the board's consideration. Victor slammed his hand on the table. This isn't up for debate, Layla. Dad has made his decision. Actually, I slid my own folders to each board member. Major leadership changes require a 2/3 majority vote from all shareholders according to our corporate bylaws. Article 4, Section 7 if you'd like to reference it. Which doesn't matter, Victor said through gritted teeth. Since Dad controls 55% of the shares and I control 15. That's 70%. Math wasn't your best subject, but even you can figure that one out. I turned to our corporate counsel, Janet Winters, who had been watching the exchange with careful neutrality. Ms. Winters, could you please confirm the current shareholder registry for the board? Janet adjusted her glasses, clearly uncomfortable with being put on the spot. Yes. She opened her leather portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. As of last quarter's filing, ownership of Hamilton Custom Furniture is as follows. Richard Hamilton, 30%. Victor Hamilton, 15%. Berkshire Growth Partners, 10%. And... She paused, her eyes flicking to me. And? My father prompted, a note of confusion entering his voice. Layla Hamilton, 45%, Janet finished. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor's face drained of color. The venture capitalists leaned forward, suddenly much more interested in the family drama unfolding before them. That's impossible, my father finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I control 55% of this company. Always have. You did, I agreed. Until about 7 years ago, when you sold 25% to Atlas Venture Group to cover the emergency cash injection the company needed after the Westridge real estate development failed. The Westridge development, luxury condominiums, with custom Hamilton furnishings included, had been my father's pet project. Against my advice, he'd invested heavily, only to lose millions when the developer filed for bankruptcy. It had nearly destroyed us. And Atlas sold their shares? One of the venture capitalists asked, his interest clearly piqued. To a silent partner, I confirmed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who later acquired an additional 20% from various minor shareholders, including 3% from Uncle Robert, when he needed medical treatment not covered by insurance. Victor's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. You don't have that? Kind of money. I met his gaze steadily. When Mom died, she left me her life insurance policy. $2 million that Dad wanted me to use for an MBA I had no interest in pursuing. Instead, I worked with a private equity firm to leverage that into a stake in our family's company when it was at its lowest valuation point. I turned back to the board. I've remained a silent partner because I wanted to focus on rebuilding our business, not fighting political battles. But I can't remain silent when the future of everything we've built is at stake. My father's face had gone from shocked to thunderous. You went behind my back? Bought shares without telling me? Your own father? The hurt in his voice was real, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then, I remembered the nights I'd spent poring over production schedules while he and Victor attended charity galas. The vacations I'd canceled to solve supply chain crises. The relationship that had ended because my partner got tired of competing. With my dedication to the family business, I tried talking to you, Dad. For years. About sustainable growth strategies. About production modernization. About the importance of our custom business versus the ready-made line Victor keeps pushing. You patted me on the head and told me to leave the business decisions to the men in the family. Several board members winced at that. My father had the grace to look embarrassed. So yes, I became a silent partner. And then I rolled up my sleeves and got to work saving this company while you and Victor were still in denial about how bad things had gotten. I opened my proposal folder. Now, I'd like the board to consider my succession plan, which includes a co-CEO structure with clearly delineated responsibilities based on our respective strengths. Victor stood abruptly, his chair skidding backward. This is ridiculous. Dad, are you going to let her hijack this company? Our family legacy? Our father sat silent, staring at the table as if trying to process everything he'd just learned. Our family legacy, I repeated softly. Do you even know what that means, Victor? Do you know why grandfather started making furniture in the first place? To make money, obviously, Victor snapped. The same reason any business exists. I shook my head. He started because he believed that people deserved furniture that would last generations, not disposable pieces that fall apart after a few years. He believed in craftsmanship as a form of integrity. I looked around the table. That's the legacy I've been protecting. The reason our clients still commission pieces from us despite prices that are 3 times higher than our competitors. Janet Winters cleared her throat. If I may, the shareholding distribution Ms. Hamilton has outlined is accurate according to our records. That means any succession plan does indeed require her approval to reach the necessary 2/3 majority. A tense silence fell over the room. Victor remained standing, his hands balled into fists at his sides. My father finally looked up, his expression unreadable. I think, said Margaret Chen, one of our venture capital board members, that we should review both proposals thoroughly before making any decisions. Perhaps a special session next week after everyone has had time to digest this new information? The suggestion broke the tension slightly. Board members nodded, clearly eager to escape the family drama. Fine, my father said curtly. 1 week, and Layla, he added as everyone began gathering their things. I expect a full explanation of how this happened without my knowledge. Of course, Dad. I collected my materials calmly, though my hands wanted to shake. I have all the documentation ready whenever you'd like to review it. As the board members filed out, Victor remained behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. You think you're so clever, he hissed, leaning across the table toward me. But this company is a Hamilton legacy. It belongs to the Hamilton name. I am a Hamilton, I reminded him. Not for long. You're 34, Layla. No husband, no children. Just this obsession with furniture. When you're gone, your shares will revert to the family anyway. The casual cruelty of his words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. My perpetually single status was a frequent topic at family gatherings, with not-so-subtle suggestions that my devotion to the business had made me somehow less of a woman. My shares will go to whomever I designate in my will, I said quietly. And I've had plenty of time to consider that designation while I've been working 80-hour weeks to save our family business. Victor's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. Dad won't let you get away with this corporate coup. I closed my portfolio and headed for the door, pausing only briefly. It's not a coup, Victor. It's a partnership, if you're willing to see me as one. But either way, Hamilton Custom Furniture will continue to stand for craftsmanship and quality, not just quarterly profits. I owe Mom that much. As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed with texts from board members, most expressing surprise, a few offering cautious congratulations. I ignored them all, focusing instead on maintaining my composure until I closed my office door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to sink into my chair, hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. On my desk, Mom smiled from our photograph, her hand steady on the chisel as she showed me how to carve the perfect dovetail joint. Measure twice, cut once, she always said. And never reveal your full design until you're ready for the client to see it. I'd been measuring for 8 years, watching as Victor positioned himself as the heir apparent while dismissing my contributions as mere arts and crafts. Today, I'd finally made the cut, revealed the design I'd been working towards since the ideal day I buried my mother and promised her I wouldn't let her life's work fade away. My office phone rang, jerking me from my thoughts. The display showed it was Elise Hernandez, our production manager and one of the few people who knew about my silent partnership. So? She asked without preamble when I answered. Did you drop the bomb? I did. I exhaled slowly. It went about as well as expected, meaning Victor had a meltdown and your dad looked like he'd seen a ghost? Despite everything, I laughed. Pretty much. There's a special board meeting next week to review both succession proposals. Both? You're still considering working with Victor after everything he said about you? I gazed out my window at the factory floor below, where craftspeople were, transforming raw lumber into heirlooms. Carlos, our master carpenter who'd been with the company for 30 years. May, the young furniture designer I'd personally recruited from RISD who was already winning awards. Jason, the finishing expert whose non-toxic lacquer formulation had opened up an entirely new market for us in eco-conscious luxury furnishings. This was never about me versus Victor, I said finally. It's about ensuring Hamilton Custom Furniture continues for another generation. If that means finding a way to work with my brother, then that's what I'll do. You're a better person than me, Elise replied. But that's why you're the boss. The boss. The words felt strange after so many years of working in the shadows, of letting my father and brother be the public faces of the company while I focused on operations and production. Not yet, I said. But maybe soon. After hanging up, I reopened my laptop and pulled up the presentation I'd prepared for next week's meeting. Months of work detailing my vision for Hamilton Custom Furniture's future. A vision that honored our heritage while embracing innovation. A vision my mother would have been proud of. The production floor buzzer sounded, indicating the end of the day shift. Soon the night crew would arrive to continue work on our ever-growing order backlog. I gathered my things, prepared to make my usual rounds checking in with the departing craftspeople, asking about their progress, listening to their insights. Victor had never understood this part of my routine, dismissing it as playing social worker instead of focusing on the bottom line. He didn't see how these daily conversations translated into loyalty, into quality, into the soul of what made our furniture special. As I stepped onto the production floor, Carlos looked up from the rocking chair he was assembling and gave me a knowing smile. Word traveled fast in a family business. I heard you had an interesting board meeting, Jeffa, he said in Spanish as I approached. News travels fast, I replied in the same language. He shrugged. Good news should travel fast. It's about time they recognized who's really been running things. Around here. I smiled but shook my head. It's not about recognition, Carlos. It's about direction. Making sure we stay true to what Hamilton has always stood for. See. He nodded, running his hand over the arm of the rocking chair, feeling for imperfections invisible to the untrained eye. But a good direction needs a good leader. He looked up, his expression serious. Your mother would be proud, Layla. She always said you were the one who truly understood the soul of the wood. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Thank you, Carlos. That means more than you know. As I continued my rounds, I felt a new sense of purpose settling over me. The battle was far from over. Victor wouldn't give up easily, and my father's hurt feelings would need to be addressed. But for the first time in years, I was fighting in the open rather than from the shadows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. For now, I ran my fingers along a half-finished dining table, feeling the grain of the maple beneath my fingertips, sensing the potential of what it would become in skilled hands. Just as Hamilton custom furniture still had potential, still had a future worth fighting for. A future I intended to shape, no longer as a silent partner, but as a leader ready to step into the light. The next morning, I arrived at the workshop. Before dawn. A habit formed years ago when deadlines loomed and I needed the quiet hours to think. The factory floor was silent, the machines dormant, but the scent of wood and lacquer hung in the air, as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I ran my fingers along a half-finished dining table someone had carefully covered before leaving, feeling the subtle imperfections that made our pieces unique. Each table told a story, not just of the tree it came from, but of the hands that shaped it. My contemplation was interrupted by the security door beeping. Only a handful of people had access codes this early. I turned, expecting to see Elise or perhaps Carlos, who sometimes started early to get ahead on complex projects. Instead, my father stood in the doorway. In the gray half-light, he looked older than he had yesterday, the weight of revelation etched in the lines of his face. He wore casual clothes, a worn flannel shirt, jeans, work boots, attire I hadn't seen him in for years. Not since he'd decided that being CEO meant dressing the part, even in a furniture factory. I thought I might find you here, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. I straightened, unsure what to expect. Anger? Demands for explanation? More accusations of betrayal? I'm always here, Dad. He nodded, moving deeper into the workshop, his eyes taking in the projects, in various stages of completion. Your mother used to come in early too, said she could hear the wood better when the machines were quiet. A small, sad smile crossed his face. I always thought that was just Isabella being poetic. The mention of Mom caught me off guard. We rarely spoke of her, my father finding it too painful, Victor seeming to barely remember her at all. It's not poetry, I said, running my palm across the table's surface. Different woods have different voices. Oak is straightforward, honest. Maple can be temperamental. Cherry darkens and deepens with age, revealing new facets of itself over time. I shrugged slightly. At least that's how Mom explained it to me. Dad picked up a small offcut of walnut from a nearby work table, turning it over in his hands. You knew, didn't you, about Westridge? How bad it really was? The change of subject didn't surprise me. My father had never been comfortable with emotion, preferring the concrete reality of business figures, even when those figures spelled disaster. I suspected, I admitted. The numbers weren't adding up in the quarterly reports. Too much capital, tied up in a single venture, not enough liquidity to weather a downturn. I met his eyes. I tried to talk to you about it. He nodded slowly. I remember. I thought you were being overly cautious. Told myself you didn't understand the opportunity because you didn't have the right education. He set the walnut piece down carefully. By the time I realized how wrong I was, we were on the brink of bankruptcy. The admission stunned me. My father had never acknowledged his role in the Westridge fiasco, at least not to me. The closest he'd come was a terse announcement that the company was facing temporary cash flow challenges that would necessitate strategic asset reallocation, corporate speak for selling off inventory at fire sale prices and laying off a third of our workforce. Why Atlas? I asked. Of all the potential investors, why go to a venture capital firm with no experience in manufacturing or high-end furniture? Because they were the only ones willing to inject capital without taking operational control, he said quietly. Or, so I thought, understanding dawned. They had a silent partner stipulation from the beginning. He nodded. They represented their client's interests, someone looking for a significant stake in an established family business with growth potential. A humorless laugh escaped him. I never imagined that client was my own daughter. The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment, I questioned my decision to keep my involvement secret for so long. But then I remembered the countless strategy meetings where my input had been dismissed, the production improvements attributed to team effort, while Victor's minor sales successes were celebrated lavishly, the consistent message that my role was temporary until I settled down with the right man. Would you have accepted my help if I'd offered it directly? I asked. The question hung between us. We both knew the answer. After a long moment, he sighed. When did you become so formidable, Layla? You were always the sensitive one, the artistic child. I've always been formidable, Dad. You and Victor. Just never bothered to notice because it didn't fit the narrative you created about me. I moved to the scheduling board where I'd mapped out the next 3 months of production. Being artistic doesn't mean I can't also understand financing and operations. Mom taught me that business is just another form of craft, seeing the potential in raw materials and shaping them into something valuable. Your mother was an exceptional woman, he acknowledged. Yes, she was. And she built this company as much as you did, though her name never appeared on the letterhead. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Dad flinched slightly but didn't argue the point. Instead, he walked slowly around the workshop, touching tools and materials with a familiarity that surprised me. I sometimes forgot that before he became the suit-wearing CEO, my father had been a craftsman too. Do you remember the summer you were 14? He asked suddenly. When you insisted on learning dovetail joints before your school trip to Europe? The memory caught me off guard. You said I was too young for such advanced techniques. That I'd just waste valuable hardwood. He nodded. And your mother overruled me. Gave you scraps of maple to practice on. A genuine smile touched his lips. You worked 12 hours a day for 2 weeks straight. Came away with blisters and the most perfect dovetails I'd ever seen from a beginner. Mom said talent was just the starting point. The rest was perseverance and precision. She was right. He turned to face me fully. About that, and about you. She always said you would be the one to carry Hamilton forward, not because you were the most talented, though God knows you were, but because you understood what the business truly meant. My throat tightened unexpectedly. You never told me that. I should have. He rubbed a hand across his face. After she died, I think I resented how much you reminded me of her. The way you approached problems, your dedication to the craft. It was like seeing her ghost, and I wasn't ready for that. The admission hung in the air between us, more meaningful than any apology he could have offered. Victor reminds me of my father, he continued after a moment. Ambitious, confident, comfortable in boardrooms and at charity galas. I gravitated toward that familiarity. He shook his head. I convinced myself that was what the company needed to move forward. "And now?" I asked. Before he could answer, the security door beeped again. This time it was Elise, who stopped short at the sight of my father. "Mr. Hamilton," she said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here this early." "Just having a conversation with my daughter," he replied, "about the future of our company." The pointed use of "our" wasn't lost on me. "I'll give you privacy," Elise said, but I shook my head. Actually, Elise should be part of this discussion. She knows more about our supply chain challenges than anyone. My father raised an eyebrow but nodded. "The Brazilian rosewood embargo?" "Among other things," I confirmed. "We've been working on alternatives for clients who insist on exotic hardwoods, sustainable sources, reclaimed materials. Victor says those are just trending buzzwords, that our clients want the real thing, regardless of environmental impact." "Victor is wrong," I said firmly. "Our client surveys show that 82% of our high-net-worth customers under 50 are deeply concerned about sustainability. They want heirloom pieces, yes, but not at the expense of environmental destruction." "She's right, Mr. Hamilton," Elise added. "The Valencia Commission specifically requested documentation of sustainable sourcing for every component of their dining set." "The $800,000 commission?" Dad asked, startled. $820,000 with the custom china cabinet they added last month," I corrected. He let out a low whistle. "Victor didn't mention that addition." "Victor doesn't handle production communications," Elise pointed out. "Layla does." A look of contemplation crossed my father's face, and I realized he was finally seeing the full picture of how the company actually functioned, and who was truly essential to its operation. "The succession meeting," he said abruptly. "I'd like to move it up. This afternoon, if the board members are available." Alarm flared through me. "Dad, I don't think rushing this decision is wise. Everyone needs time to review both proposals carefully." "I'm not rushing a decision," he clarified. "I'm expediting the discussion. There are clearly components of this business I've been overlooking." He glanced at Elise. "Would you excuse us for a moment?" After she stepped away, he turned back to me. "Victor called me last night after the meeting. He wants to bring in lawyers to challenge your share acquisition." My stomach dropped. "On what grounds? Everything was done legally." "He's claiming you had inside information as an employee that gave you an unfair advantage in acquiring shares. That you deliberately kept the company's valuation depressed until you could secure control." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "That's ridiculous. I've worked tirelessly to increase our value and profitability. Every decision I've made has been to strengthen Hamilton, not weaken it." "I know that," my father said, surprising me. "But Victor is determined, and he's already reached out to several board members to sway them to his side." Now I understood the urgency. "What did you tell him?" My father was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving across the workshop, the space his father had built, that he had expanded, that I had modernized, each generation leaving its mark while preserving what came before. I told him I needed time to think, he finally said, "and then I came here hoping to find some clarity." "And did you?" He met my gaze directly. "I'm beginning to. But first, I need to understand your vision for Hamilton's future. Not just the business aspects, but what you believe this company means to our family legacy." The question caught me off guard. It was the first time in years, perhaps ever, that my father had asked for my perspective without a predetermined answer in mind. "Let me show you," I said after a moment. I led him to my office, unlocking a cabinet I rarely opened in front of others. Inside was a scale model of what I'd been designing for months, a complete reorganization of our production facility that would increase efficiency while creating a visitor gallery where clients could watch master craftspeople at work. Accompanying blueprints showed a new wing dedicated to apprenticeships in education, a formal program to train the next generation of furniture makers. This is the Heritage Initiative, I explained. A way to preserve traditional woodworking techniques while bringing them into the 21st century. My father studied the model with unexpected intensity. Where would the funding come from? Phase 1 is already funded. I've been allocating 5% of our profits to a special projects account for the past 3 years. For Phase 2, I've secured preliminary interest from several educational foundations and a matching grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And Victor? Where does he fit in this vision? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Victor excels at client relations and marketing. In my proposal, he would lead our client experience division, developing the relationships that bring in commissions while I focus on ensuring we can deliver what he promises. Co-CEOs, my father mused, but with distinct spheres of influence. Exactly. Playing to our respective strengths rather than forcing one of us to handle aspects of the business we're not suited for. A knock at my office door interrupted us. It was Carlos, looking concerned. Sorry to intrude, but I thought you should know. Victor just arrived with 2 men in suits. They're asking for access to the company's share registry and transaction records. My father and I exchanged glances. He straightened his shoulders, suddenly looking more like the commanding CEO I remembered from childhood. It seems our timeline has been accelerated, he said grimly. Carlos, please tell my son that I'll meet him in the main conference room in 15 minutes. And Layla, he added, turning back to me, bring your proposal. All of it. It's time we settled this. As a family. As Carlos departed, I gathered my materials with hands that weren't quite steady. After years of working in the shadows, I was about to step fully into the light, with all the scrutiny and conflict that entailed. Are you ready for this? My father asked quietly. I thought of all the decisions that had led me to this moment. The insurance money I'd invested instead of spent, the nights and weekends sacrificed, the relationship that had withered from neglect while I focused on saving Hamilton, the quiet pride I'd swallowed when Victor took credit for initiatives I'd developed. I've been ready for years, I told him. The question is, are you ready to acknowledge that the daughter you underestimated might be exactly what this company needs? He held my gaze for a long moment. I'm ready to listen. Truly listen. Perhaps for the first time. He gestured toward the door. After you, Ms. Hamilton. I believe we have a meeting to attend. I gathered my portfolio and the model, stepping toward a confrontation I'd both dreaded and prepared for since the day I'd become Hamilton Custom Furniture's silent partner. Whatever happened next would determine not just my future, but the legacy my grandparents and parents had built. A legacy I was finally ready to claim openly as my own. The main conference room felt smaller than usual, crowded with tension and unspoken accusations. Victor stood by the window, flanked by 2 men whose expensive suits and predatory postures screamed, corporate attorneys. His surprise at seeing our father and me enter together was quickly masked by a practiced smile. Dad, perfect timing. These gentlemen are from Blackstone and Reed. They specialize in corporate governance and shareholder disputes. Victor gestured as if he were introducing colleagues at a networking event, rather than lawyers brought in to challenge my position. I know who they are, my father replied coolly. James Blackstone represented Carver Industries when they tried to hostile take over Hamilton 10 years ago. He turned to the taller of the 2 men. An unsuccessful attempt, as I recall. Blackstone's smile thinned. Ancient history, Richard. Today we're here to discuss more domestic concerns. Namely, the second lawyer interjected, potentially fraudulent share acquisition by an insider with fiduciary responsibilities to existing shareholders. I set my materials on the conference table, refusing to be intimidated. That's a serious accusation to make without evidence, Mr. Reed. Daniel Reed. He placed a leather portfolio on the table. And we have substantial evidence suggesting You leveraged internal knowledge to systematically acquire shares while intentionally suppressing the company's market value. That's absurd, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. Every initiative I've implemented has been designed to strengthen Hamilton's position and increase profitability. Our valuation has tripled in the last 5 years. After you secured controlling interest, Victor cut in. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? My father cleared his throat. Before we continue this discussion, I should inform you that I've called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon, 3 o'clock. He glanced at his watch. Which gives us exactly 4 hours to determine whether we're presenting a united front to our board members or airing the family's dirty laundry for all to see. Victor's confident expression faltered. You can't just call a meeting without... I'm still CEO, our father interrupted sharply. And unlike some people in this room, I prefer to resolve family disputes privately before they damage the company we all claim to care about. The rebuke landed squarely on Victor, whose face flushed. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their strategy. Perhaps we should give the Hamilton family some privacy, Blackstone suggested smoothly. No, Victor snapped. You stay. We need to establish the legal groundwork before the board meeting. My father's expression hardened. What we need, Victor, is to have an honest conversation about the future of this company without paid advocates trying to shape the narrative. He turned to the lawyers. Gentlemen, you'll be notified when your services are required. For now, this is a family matter. For a moment, it seemed like Victor might argue, but something in our father's demeanor, an authority I hadn't seen him exercise in years, silenced his objection. After an awkward pause, the lawyers gathered their materials and departed, leaving, behind a wake of expensive cologne and unresolved tension. As soon as the door closed, Victor rounded on me. Quite the performance getting Dad on your side. What did you tell him? That I'm trying to destroy Mom's precious legacy? That I don't care about craftsmanship or quality or whatever sentimental nonsense you've been peddling? What your sister told me, our father interjected before I could respond, is that she's been quietly saving this company while you've been positioning yourself to take it over. Victor's laugh was bitter. Is that what she told you? That she's the selfless savior and I'm the villain? Classic Layla, always playing the martyr. He turned to me, eyes narrowed. Did you happen to mention your plans to slash the ready-made furniture line? The line that's brought in 60% of our new customers over the past 2 years? I stiffened, surprised by his knowledge of proposals I'd only discussed with the production team. I see you've been going through my files. I see you've been making decisions that affect my division without bothering to consult me. He shot back. The ready-made line has the lowest profit margin of any product we offer, I explained, struggling to keep my tone professional. And the quality control issues. The ready-made line makes our brand accessible to younger clients who will eventually upgrade to custom pieces, Victor interrupted. It's called building a customer pipeline, something you'd understand if you spent any time thinking about sales instead of obsessing over joinery techniques. Enough! Our father's palm hit the table with enough force to make us both jump. This is exactly why we're having problems. You're both so convinced you're right that you can't see how your perspectives might complement each other. Complement? Victor scoffed. Layla doesn't want a partner, Dad. She wants control. Just look at how she went behind our backs to buy up shares. Like you went behind my back to bring in lawyers? I countered. Our father raised a hand for silence. I want to see both of your proposals, side by side, now. For the next hour, we laid out our competing visions for Hamilton's future. Victor's plan emphasized aggressive expansion into ready-made lines, licensing the Hamilton name for retail partnerships, and opening showrooms in major cities worldwide. Mine focused on strengthening our custom business, developing the apprenticeship program, and creating a museum-quality exhibition space to showcase our historical pieces alongside contemporary work. Your proposal has no meaningful growth strategy, Victor argued after I'd finished. It's just more of the same with some educational window dressing, and yours turns Hamilton into a glorified furniture retailer, I retorted. You're sacrificing everything that makes us unique for the sake of quick expansion. Our father had remained silent throughout both presentations, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. Now he leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. You're both right, he said finally. And you're both wrong. We stared at him in surprise. Victor, your sister has been the operational backbone of this company for years. Without her focus on quality and craftsmanship, we wouldn't have a reputation worth leveraging for the expansions you're proposing. He turned to me. And Layla, your brother has identified valid market opportunities that could secure Hamilton's financial future for generations. His ability to build relationships with high-net-worth clients has been invaluable. So what are you saying? Victor asked, suspicious. I'm saying that this company needs both of you. Not competing against each other, but working together. Dad picked up my Heritage Initiative model. This apprenticeship program, for instance. Combined with Victor's retail strategy, it could create a perfect pipeline. Train the next generation of craftspeople while simultaneously expanding our customer base. The suggestion made practical sense, but the hurt and anger of yesterday's confrontation still simmered beneath the surface. How exactly would that work when Victor doesn't respect anything I've built here? And when Layla has been deliberately hiding her share ownership to maintain control? Victor added. Our father sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. That's the question we need to answer before the board meeting. Because right now, the only people who would benefit from your continued conflict are the lawyers your brother so helpfully invited into our business. A knock at the door interrupted us. Janet Winters, our corporate counsel, entered with an expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. I apologize for the interruption, she said, her professional tone tinged with concern. But I've just received some information the family should be aware of immediately. My father gestured for her to continue. Mr. Victor's attorneys filed preliminary paperwork this morning, challenging Ms. Layla's share ownership on grounds of breached fiduciary duty. She handed my father a document. They've also made a formal request to freeze all board activities and leadership changes pending a legal investigation. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just a family power struggle anymore. It was a legal battle that could paralyze our company for months or even years. You did what? My father demanded, turning to Victor. What I had to do, Victor replied, though he had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Layla left me no choice by springing her secret ownership on us yesterday. So your solution was to potentially tie up our company in litigation during our busiest production quarter? I asked incredulously. It's a precautionary measure, Victor insisted. The filing can be withdrawn if we reach an acceptable agreement. Blackmail, you mean? I said flatly. Business negotiation, he corrected. Something you'd understand if you'd bothered to get proper training instead of playing around with wood all day. The familiar dismissal ignited something in me. Not just anger at Victor's tactics, but determination to finally end the pattern of having my contributions minimized. Janet, I said, turning to our counsel, could you please explain to my brother what will happen if I, as the majority shareholder, decide to call for a full audit of all executive expenses and client entertainment costs for the past 5 years? Victor's expression shifted from smugness to alarm so quickly it would have been comical under different circumstances. That would be within your rights as majority shareholder, Janet confirmed, though it would potentially expose sensitive client information. And what about the Westlake project? I continued. Would an audit reveal who authorized the undocumented cash payments to the zoning commissioner? Victor's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Dad approved those payments. You'd be implicating him too. Our father's head snapped up. I most certainly did not approve any such payments, Victor. What are you talking about? The conference room fell silent as the implication of Victor's words sank in. He had apparently been making unauthorized payments under our father's name, payments that could potentially constitute bribery. Janet Winters cleared her throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should give the family some privacy to discuss these matters. No, my father said firmly. As corporate counsel, you should be present for this. He turned to Victor, his expression thunderous. Explain yourself. Now. Victor's confidence crumbled visibly. The Westlake development was going to be tied up in zoning disputes for years. Everyone makes these kinds of arrangements. It's just how business is done in real estate development. We are not a real estate development company, I said quietly. We're a furniture manufacturer with a 100-year reputation for integrity. Reputation that would be destroyed if this became public, Victor pointed out, a note of desperation entering his voice. Is that what you want, Layla? To burn down our family legacy just to prove you're right? The question hung in the air between us, laden with implications. I could use this information to completely discredit Victor, to remove him as a threat to my leadership. But at what cost to Hamilton? To our father, who would inevitably be tainted by the scandal regardless of his actual involvement. What I want, I said carefully, is for Hamilton to continue creating furniture that stands the test of time. Pieces that our grandchildren's grandchildren will recognize as the work of master craftspeople who cared about every detail. I met Victor's gaze directly. And I want my brother to understand that shortcuts, whether in woodworking or in business, ethics, always show themselves eventually. Our father stood abruptly. Janet, we need to understand the full legal implications of what Victor has done, and the potential fallout if it becomes public. She nodded. I'll prepare a confidential brief, but I should warn you, if there were improper payments made in the company's name, we may have disclosure obligations regardless of the family's wishes. As Janet made notes, my father turned to us with an expression I hadn't seen since childhood. The look that had always preceded serious consequences for serious misbehavior. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Victor, you will immediately contact your lawyers and withdraw that legal filing. Layla, you will agree to a full and transparent disclosure of how you acquired your shares. Not because there was anything illegal about it, but because secrets have clearly damaged this family enough. He pointed to my Heritage Initiative model. This afternoon, we will present a unified plan to the board that incorporates elements from both your proposals. A plan that acknowledges Layla's controlling interest while creating a meaningful leadership role for Victor that leverages his strengths without giving him financial authority he's proven he can't be trusted with. Victor opened his mouth to protest, but our father silenced him with a look. And after the board meeting, the three of us are going to have a very long conversation about what it means to be worthy of the Hamilton name. He glanced at his watch. You have 2 hours to decide whether you can work together under these terms, or whether you'd prefer to destroy this company fighting over who gets to control its corpse. With that, he strode out of the conference room, leaving Victor and me in stunned silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The magnitude of what had been revealed, and what was at stake, seemed to have momentarily shocked us out of our animosity. Finally, Victor sank into a chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He's really angry. Did you expect him not to be? I asked, genuinely curious about what he'd been thinking. You made unauthorized payments that could expose the company to legal liability, Victor. I was trying to secure permits for the showroom expansion you kept blocking, he said defensively, though the justification sounded hollow even to my ears. I don't know what I thought. Looking at my brother, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, not just arrogance and ambition, but insecurity. A desperate need to prove himself, to make his mark on the company as significant as mine had become. We need to talk, I said, taking the seat across from him. Really talk. No lawyers, no dad, no board members. Just us. I placed my hand on the table between us. Because in 2 hours we either walk into that board meeting as partners or as enemies. and only one of those options leaves Hamilton standing. Victor stared at my outstretched hand, conflict written across his face. The coming conversation wouldn't be easy. Too much had been said, too many lines crossed. But as his gaze shifted to our mother's table, around which we were seated, something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Partners," he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "Is that even possible at this point?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But for Hamilton's sake, for Mom's legacy, I'm willing to try if you are." Slowly, reluctantly, Victor reached across the table and took my hand. The boardroom hummed with subdued conversations as members arrived for the emergency meeting. I stood by the window, watching storm clouds gather over the city, a fitting backdrop for what was about to unfold. After 2 hours of difficult but necessary conversation with Victor, we'd reached an uneasy truce. Whether it would hold through the meeting remained to be seen. "They're all here," Elise murmured, appearing at my elbow. "Including Diane Reynolds." I turned sharply. "Our former CFO? Why would she—" "Victor invited her," Elise explained. "She arrived with the venture capital representatives." A chill ran through me. Diane had left Hamilton 3 months ago after a heated disagreement with my father over financial reporting practices. Her presence suggested Victor had been planning this confrontation for longer than I'd realized. "Did you know?" I asked Victor as he approached, adjusting his tie. "That Diane would be here?" "Yes." At least he had the decency not to feign ignorance. The board respects her financial expertise. We need that perspective today. Before I could respond, our father called the meeting to order. Board members took their seats, curiosity and concern evident on their faces. Janet Winters distributed folders containing both succession proposals, now hastily modified to reflect our tentative compromise. "Thank you all for accommodating this urgent meeting," my father began. "As you know, yesterday we discussed the future leadership of Hamilton Custom Furniture. Today, circumstances require us to accelerate that decision." Margaret Chen, one of our venture capital board members, leaned forward. "I understand there are questions about shareholder distribution that weren't previously disclosed." "Yes," my father acknowledged. "It appears that over the past 7 years, there have been significant changes in ownership that weren't properly communicated to all board members." He nodded to Janet, who projected a chart showing the current shareholder breakdown. "As you can see, my daughter Layla now holds controlling interest at 45%. A murmur rippled through the room. Diane Reynolds, seated near the back, whispered something to the board member beside her. "I'd like to address this directly," I said, standing. 7 years ago, when Hamilton faced financial crisis following the Westridge development, I invested my inheritance from my mother to secure the company's future. I did this through a private equity group to avoid creating family tension during an already difficult time. "And to avoid proper oversight of your share acquisition," Diane interjected. "There was nothing improper about the transactions," Janet clarified. "All paperwork was filed correctly with appropriate regulatory bodies." "The issue isn't legality," Victor said, rising to stand beside me in a show of unity we'd carefully choreographed. "It's transparency. As my sister's brother and fellow executive, I should have been informed of these developments." "You're right," I acknowledged, turning to face him directly. "The admission wasn't just for show. Our earlier conversation had forced me to recognize how my secrecy had contributed to our problems. I should have disclosed my ownership once the immediate crisis had passed. That lack of transparency created unnecessary division." Victor nodded, the gesture subtle but visible to everyone present. "And I should have acknowledged the critical role Layla has played in Hamilton's success, rather than positioning myself as the sole viable successor." The board members exchanged surprised glances at our apparent reconciliation. My father's expression remained carefully neutral, though I detected a hint of cautious optimism in his eyes. Margaret Chen tapped her pen against her portfolio. This is all very touching, but it doesn't resolve the fundamental question of leadership. Based on current ownership, Layla controls the company. Why are we even discussing succession? Because leadership isn't just about ownership, I replied. It's about utilizing everyone's strengths for the company's benefit. Victor and I have different skills that, when combined effectively, create a stronger whole than either of us could offer individually. We're proposing a dual leadership structure, Victor continued. Layla would serve as CEO, overseeing production, quality control, and our heritage initiatives. I would serve as president, focusing on client relationships, market expansion, and brand development. With clear lines of authority and responsibility, I added, and proper financial oversight mechanisms for all expenditures. That last addition, a direct reference to Victor's unauthorized payments, made him stiffen beside me, but he maintained his composure. This sounds suspiciously like a hastily constructed compromise to avoid legal battles over share ownership, observed Robert Finch, one of our longest-serving board members. It is a compromise, I acknowledged frankly, but not a hasty one. Victor and I have recognized that our previous approach, competing rather than collaborating, has been damaging to Hamilton and our family. And we're supposed to believe this. Epiphany happened overnight? Diane asked skeptically. My father cleared his throat. Sometimes clarity comes from crisis, Diane. Something you might remember from your tenure here. The subtle reminder of her own hasty departure silenced her temporarily. Before we proceed further, Janet interjected, there's another matter the board should be aware of. She glanced at my father, who nodded his permission. We've discovered potentially problematic payments related to the Westlake showroom development. Nothing has been confirmed yet, but preliminary investigation suggests there may have been improper incentives provided to local officials. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Board members straightened in their seats, expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Victor stepped forward. I authorized those payments, he said clearly, without proper approval and without my father's or sister's knowledge. His confession, we had agreed he would take full responsibility, still surprised me with its directness. This is a serious matter, Margaret Chen stated, her expression hardening. One that could expose the company to significant liability. Yes, Victor agreed. Which is why I've already initiated corrective action. The payments are being reversed, with appropriate legal documentation clarifying that they were made in error. Janet is preparing a full disclosure for regulatory review. I watched the board members' reactions carefully. Some seemed impressed by Victor's candor, others troubled by the revelation itself. Our father's expression remained unreadable. This incident, I said into the silence, is precisely why our proposed leadership structure includes enhanced financial controls and board oversight of all major expenditures. No single executive, including me as majority shareholder, should have unilateral authority to commit company resources. Robert Finch leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. So, in essence, you're proposing a power-sharing arrangement with additional accountability measures that would actually limit your own authority, Ms. Hamilton. Yes, I confirmed, because what matters isn't who controls Hamilton, but that Hamilton continues to thrive for another generation. A long silence followed as board members processed everything they'd heard. I could sense the mental calculations happening around the table, weighing legal risks against business continuity, family drama against shareholder interests. I move that we vote on the dual leadership proposal, Margaret Chen said finally. Seconded, agreed another board member. As Janet prepared the formal voting procedures, Diane Reynolds raised her hand. Before we vote, I'd like to hear from Richard Hamilton. As the company's current CEO and the father of both candidates, his perspective seems notably absent from this discussion. All eyes turned to my father, who had remained unusually quiet throughout the proceedings. He stood slowly, his hands resting on the table my mother had created. When my father founded this company, he told me that furniture isn't just about function. It's about creating something that outlasts you, he began. Something future generations will treasure not just for its utility, but for the story it carries. He ran his palm across the table's smooth surface. Isabella understood that better than anyone. She saw the soul in the wood, the potential in each piece. He looked up, his gaze moving between Victor and me. I lost sight of that after she died, got caught up in expansion plans and profit margins, trying to build something impressive rather than something meaningful. A sad smile crossed his face. And in the process, I failed to see what was happening with my own children. One struggling to preserve her mother's legacy, the other trying desperately to prove his worth in the only ways he thought I valued. The personal nature of his words created a palpable discomfort in the room. Board meetings weren't typically venues for family reflection. But this isn't about my failings as a father, he continued more briskly. It's about the future of Hamilton, custom furniture. And having reviewed both proposals extensively, I believe the combined leadership approach represents our best path forward, not as a compromise to avoid conflict, but as a genuine strength. He nodded to Janet. I vote in favor of the dual leadership structure, with the additional oversight mechanisms proposed. One by one, the board members cast their votes. When the final tally was announced, 8 in favor, 1 abstention, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle wasn't completely over, but a critical hurdle had been cleared. As the meeting adjourned and board members filed out, Victor approached me, his expression a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. So, he said quietly, partners. I extended my hand. Partners, starting with a full accounting of those Westlake payments tomorrow morning. He winced but nodded. Fair enough. And I expect complete transparency on all shareholder matters going forward. Agreed. I glanced toward our father, who was deep in conversation with Janet Winters, likely discussing the legal ramifications of Victor's disclosure. This won't be easy, you know. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Victor replied, surprising me with an echo of our mother's favorite saying. At least that's what Mom always told us. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the brother I'd grown up with, before competition and resentment had created an unbridgeable divide between us. Whether that connection could be rebuilt remained to be seen, but today had been a step in the right direction. As thunder rumbled outside and rain began to patter against the windows, I thought about the storm we'd just weathered, and the challenges still to come. The heritage of Hamilton custom furniture had been preserved, at least for now. The rest would depend on whether Victor and I could truly transform our truce into a partnership worthy of our mother's legacy. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I stood in the center of our largest workshop, surrounded by half-finished furniture, pieces in the steady rhythm of craftspeople at work. Dust motes danced in sunlight streaming through skylights I'd insisted on installing during our last renovation, bringing natural light to spaces that had previously relied on harsh fluorescence. It was Thursday afternoon, traditionally my time, to walk the floor, check progress on commissions, and connect with the artisans who formed the heart of Hamilton custom furniture. But today was different. Today marked the first official presentation of our Heritage Initiative to the entire company. Almost ready? Elise asked, adjusting the display boards we'd arranged at one end of the workshop. Behind them stood a hidden surprise, something I'd been developing in secret for months, even before the ownership revelation and leadership battle. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, watching as employees began gathering. The production staff was already present, but now office workers, salespeople, and even the cleaning crew filed in. My father had mandated full company attendance, emphasizing the importance of what he called a new chapter in Hamilton's history. I spotted Victor near the entrance, deep in conversation with our newly hired compliance officer, a position created specifically to prevent any repeat of the Westlake situation? In the aftermath of the board meeting, we'd spent countless hours addressing the improper payments, implementing new financial controls, and rebuilding trust with both regulatory authorities and our own employees. It hadn't been easy, but Victor had surprised me with his willingness to take full responsibility and make amends. Our working relationship remained fragile. Years of competition and misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a matter of weeks, but we were trying. Each day brought small victories and occasional setbacks as we learned to collaborate rather than compete. "Everyone's here," Elise murmured, nodding toward the back of the room where my father had just entered, accompanied by several board members, and, unexpectedly, a journalist from Architectural Digest. A flutter of anxiety passed through me. The press presence was new information, and I shot a questioning look at Victor, who simply smiled and gave me a thumbs up. Apparently, this was his contribution to the day's events, media coverage I hadn't been consulted about. 6 months ago, such a surprise would have sparked immediate conflict between us. Today, I took a deep breath and adjusted my presentation. Accordingly, progress, not perfection. "Thank you all for being here," I began after my father's brief introduction. "Today, we're officially launching the Hamilton Heritage Initiative, a program that honors our past while securing our future." As I outlined the apprenticeship program, the visitor gallery, and the museum space dedicated to historical pieces, I watched the reactions of our craftspeople. Carlos nodded approvingly. May, our young designer, practically vibrated with excitement at the mention of collaborative projects with local art schools. These were the people who understood what Hamilton truly represented. Not just fine furniture, but a commitment to craftsmanship that spanned generations. "But the Heritage Initiative isn't just about preserving traditional techniques," I continued. "It's about innovation rooted in those traditions, which brings me to our newest development." I nodded to Elise, who removed the cover from our prototype, a dining chair that represented months of research and development. "This is the Aurora Collection," I announced. "Furniture that combines traditional joinery with revolutionary, sustainably harvested materials. Each piece is carbon negative, meaning it actually removes more carbon from the atmosphere than is produced during its creation." The distinctive chair, with its flowing lines and luminescent inlays made from reclaimed mother-of-pearl, gleamed under the workshop lights. I explained the specialized processes we'd developed, the environmental benefits, and how the collection represented Hamilton's commitment to sustainability without compromising quality or aesthetics. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, before applause broke out, starting with the production staff and rippling through the entire gathering. The Architectural Digest journalist was scribbling notes furiously, clearly intrigued by the approach. "And now," I said, "I'd like to invite my brother Victor to explain how we'll be bringing this collection to market." Victor stepped forward confidently. This part of the presentation was entirely his domain, and we'd agreed that giving him this platform was important, both for the company and for our evolving partnership. "The Aurora Collection will redefine ecological luxury in the furniture market," he began. "We'll be launching with a feature in Architectural Digest next month, followed by invitation-only viewings in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago." He outlined a sophisticated marketing strategy that honored our craftsmanship heritage while speaking directly to environmentally conscious luxury consumers. The approach was quintessential Victor, bold, marketing savvy, with an emphasis on exclusivity, but now tempered by a genuine understanding of what made our products special. "Limited production will ensure that each piece receives the attention it deserves from our master craftspeople," he emphasized, acknowledging the production team with a respectful nod. "Quality over quantity has always been the Hamilton way, and that will never change." The subtle reference to our mother's philosophy wasn't lost on me, or on our father, whose expression softened visibly. After the formal presentation, employees mingled around the prototype, examining the innovative joinery and asking questions about the materials. The journalist cornered me for an interview. Her questions focused on the intersection of tradition and innovation that defined the collection. "One last question," she said as our conversation wound down. "This initiative seems to represent a significant shift in Hamilton's direction. What prompted such a comprehensive approach now?" I considered my answer carefully. The true story of family conflict, hidden ownership, and ethical lapses wasn't something to share with the press. Yet I wanted to be honest about the transformation we were undergoing. "Sometimes," I said finally, "you need to step back and reevaluate what matters most to your organization." For Hamilton, that's always been a commitment to creating furniture that outlasts trends and becomes part of a family's story across generations. The Heritage Initiative simply formalizes that commitment while expanding how we express it. As the gathering dispersed and employees returned to their workstations, Victor approached, looking pleased but slightly apprehensive. "The Architectural Digest feature was supposed to be a surprise," he admitted. "I should have given you a heads up about the journalist." "Yes, you should have," I agreed, but without heat, though it seems to have worked out well. "The Aurora. Prototype is extraordinary, Layla. Better than I imagined when you described the concept." He gestured toward the chair, where several board members were still examining the distinctive joinery. "This could be a game-changer for us in the eco-luxury market." "It will be," I confirmed, "though we need to be careful about scaling production without compromising quality. The process is still labor-intensive." "I've been thinking about that." Victor pulled out his tablet and showed me preliminary drawings for a dedicated workshop space specifically designed for the Aurora collection. We could convert the east storage area. It already has the natural light you're always going on about, and the proximity to the main production floor would allow for mentorship opportunities with the apprenticeship program. I studied the plans, genuinely impressed. They reflected both practical production needs and the aesthetic philosophy I'd emphasized in our heritage planning. "This is actually really good," I admitted. "Don't sound so surprised," Victor replied with a hint of his old defensiveness. But then he smiled, softening the response. "I've been paying attention all these years, even when it didn't seem like it." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by our father, who approached with Margaret Chen from the Venture Capital Group. "Margaret has an interesting proposition for the Heritage Initiative," he said. "Something that might significantly accelerate the educational component." As we moved to my office to discuss the potential partnership, I caught Carlos watching us from his workbench. Victor and me walking side by side, engaged in actual collaboration rather than competition. He gave me a subtle nod of approval that meant more than any board vote or press coverage. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in the workshop after most employees had left for the day. Victor had departed for a dinner meeting with potential Aurora collection clients. My father had gone home early, a new habit he was developing as he gradually stepped back from daily operations. And even Elise had left to pick up her children from after-school activities. I ran my hand along the Aurora prototype, feeling the seamless joinery, and remembering how my mother had taught me to sense the personality in different woods. The chair represented everything I'd been fighting for: quality, sustainability, innovation rooted in tradition. But more importantly, it represented a new path forward for Hamilton custom furniture. Not my vision alone, nor Victor's, but something emerging from the tension and eventual resolution between our different perspectives. On my mother's workbench, preserved exactly as she'd left it 11 years ago, sat the half-finished jewelry box she'd been creating when her illness made it impossible to continue. I'd never had the heart to complete it, feeling that would somehow erase her presence from the piece. But now, for the first time, I considered what it might mean to finish her work, not to replace her contribution, but to honor it by carrying it forward. Perhaps that was the true meaning of legacy, not preserving something in amber, frozen and unchanging, but nurturing it so it could continue to grow and evolve. As I locked up the workshop, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction that had been absent during the years of secret share acquisition and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The path ahead wouldn't be smooth. Victor and I still had fundamental differences in our approaches, and rebuilding trust would take time. But for the first time, I was confident that Hamilton Custom Furniture would endure, not despite our family's complications, but because we had finally learned to leverage them productively. My silent partnership had been revealed, but something more important had been discovered in the process: the possibility of a genuine partnership based on shared purpose rather than shared DNA alone. 1 year later, I stood on the mezzanine overlooking our newly expanded workshop, watching as visitors moved through the space below. The Heritage Gallery had been open to the public for exactly 6 months, and today marked the official inauguration of our apprenticeship program. 10 young artisans selected from over 500 applicants nationwide, each paired with a master craftsperson for a 2-year immersive training experience. "Quite the turnout," observed a familiar voice beside me. I turned to find my father, dressed not in his usual business attire, but in a craftsman's apron, the same one he'd worn decades ago when he still worked directly with the wood. Since semi-retirement, he'd returned to his roots, spending 3 days a week in a small corner of the workshop creating simple pieces for his own enjoyment. "The mayor's here," I replied, "and the senator's office sent a representative. Apparently, creating artisanal manufacturing jobs makes for good politics. And good business," he added, nodding toward Victor, who was charming a group of potential investors near the Aurora Collection display. "Your brother's in his element." The observation held no criticism, only acknowledgement of Victor's particular talents. In the year since our confrontation and subsequent partnership, we'd settled into complementary roles that played to our respective strengths. My focus remained on production, quality, and now education through the Heritage Initiative, while Victor had transformed our market presence and client relationships. The Munich Commission came through, I told my father. 7 pieces for their new headquarters. Victor convinced them that American sustainable luxury furniture makes a stronger statement than Italian imports. "Smart angle," Dad nodded approvingly. "Your mother would have appreciated that," she always said. "That the best sales pitch is simply the truth about what makes your work special," I finished with him, both of us smiling at the shared memory. Below us, one of the apprentices was demonstrating hand-cut dovetail joints to an enthusiastic group of high school students, part of our new community outreach program. I'd insisted that the apprenticeship include teaching components, ensuring that each new generation of craftspeople would also learn to communicate their knowledge to others. "Ms. Hamilton?" A young woman in a crisp pantsuit approached, tablet in hand. "The documentary crew is ready for your interview whenever you're available." "Thank you, Jessica. I'll be down shortly." As our new communications director departed, I turned back to my father. "Still feels strange being called Ms. Hamilton by someone other than a client." "You'd better get used to it," he replied. "That feature in Architectural Digest has made you the face of sustainable luxury furniture." 3 interview requests just this week, according to the board report. The media attention had been unexpected, a side effect of the Aurora Collection's success and our Heritage Initiative. What had begun as a family business story had evolved into something broader, a narrative about American craftsmanship, sustainability, and the modern revival of traditional artistry. The documentary currently being filmed would be featured on a major streaming platform, bringing our approach to audiences worldwide. "Have you seen the new design May completed for the Children's Hospital donation?" I asked, changing the subject away from my reluctant public role. "The interactive reading nook? It's brilliant. Functional art that actually encourages children to engage with books." Pride colored his voice. "You were right to promote her to lead designer last month." The compliment still felt somewhat novel, my father acknowledging when my decisions proved correct. Our relationship had evolved alongside the business, growing into something more balanced, with mutual respect gradually replacing the old dynamics of authority and deference. Layla? Victor appeared at the top of the mezzanine stairs, slightly breathless. The Singapore investors are here early. They're particularly interested in the apprenticeship model and how it might translate to Asian markets. I thought they weren't arriving until tomorrow? Change of plans. Their London meetings ended early. He glanced at his watch. The documentary crew will need to wait. Singapore represents potential expansion throughout Southeast Asia. Exactly what we outlined in the 5-year plan. A year ago, such a schedule change would have sparked tension between us, Victor prioritizing investors over commitments I'd already made. But our partnership had matured beyond those reflexive conflicts. I'll handle the documentary interview, our father offered. I'm officially part of the company history now anyway. You two focus on Singapore. As we descended the stairs together, Victor briefly touched my elbow. I've been meaning to tell you, I invited someone to join us for the family dinner tonight. I raised an eyebrow, curious. Our monthly family dinners had become an important tradition during the past year, a time to discuss business matters informally and reconnect as family rather than colleagues. Melissa Chen, he clarified, the sustainability consultant we worked with on the Aurora collection. We've been seeing each other outside of work, and it's getting serious. The revelation surprised me. Victor's previous relationships had typically been with women who enhanced his image, socialites and models who looked impressive at charity galas, but had little interest in furniture craftsmanship or family businesses. Melissa is brilliant, I said sincerely. And she actually understood what we were trying to accomplish with the recycled materials integration. Dad will like her. Relief crossed Victor's face. That's what I thought. She reminds me a little of Mom sometimes. That same intensity when she's focused on solving a problem. The comparison to our mother, something Victor rarely referenced, told me more about his feelings than any formal introduction could have. As we approached the Singapore investors, I found myself genuinely happy for my brother's personal development alongside his professional growth. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of meetings, demonstrations, and conversations with various stakeholders in our expanding enterprise. By late afternoon, I finally found a moment to slip away to my office, no longer the modest space I'd occupied for years, but a thoughtfully designed room that balanced functionality with the warmth of natural materials. On my desk sat a small, wooden box, my mother's final project, which I'd ultimately finished 6 months ago on the anniversary of her death. Completing it had been a personal watershed, an acknowledgement that honoring her legacy meant carrying it forward rather than preserving it in suspended animation. A knock at the door interrupted my momentary reflection. Carlos entered, followed by one of the new apprentices, a young woman from Detroit whose portfolio had shown extraordinary promise despite her lack of formal training. Ms. Hamilton, Zoe has a proposal for the community outreach program, Carlos explained. I thought you should hear it directly. For the next 15 minutes, I listened as Zoe outlined a plan to bring basic woodworking classes to underserved schools in the region, using simple tools and reclaimed materials to introduce children to the joy of creating with their hands. The passion in her voice reminded me of my own early experiences in my mother's workshop, discovering the magic of transformation that occurred when human creativity met natural materials. What resources would you need to launch a pilot program? I asked when she finished. Zoe's eyes widened slightly, clearly having expected a longer approval process. Just basic tools, transportation for volunteers, and maybe some promotional materials to get schools interested. Work with Jessica in communications to develop a formal proposal, I instructed. I want this included in next quarter's Heritage Initiative budget. After they departed, I opened my calendar to find time for a follow-up meeting, only to notice a reminder flashing on my screen. M's 5-year anniversary. The notation referred not to any person, but to the moment 5 years. Ago when I had acquired the final shares needed to secure controlling interest in Hamilton Custom Furniture. At the time, it had felt like the culmination of a long-term strategy, the securing of power necessary to protect my mother's legacy. Now, that milestone seemed almost quaint. True influence, I'd discovered, came not from ownership percentages, but from vision, perseverance, and the ability to inspire others to share your commitment. The silent partnership I'd cultivated for years had served its purpose. But the visible partnerships we were now building, with employees, with apprentices, with communities, and yes, even between siblings who had once been adversaries, would carry Hamilton forward in ways stock certificates never could. A text message from Victor interrupted my reflection. Singapore team signed LOI for distribution partnership. Celebration dinner tonight? I smiled, typing back. Perfect. Looking forward to meeting Melissa properly. As I prepared to leave for the day, I paused at my office window, watching the afternoon sun illuminate the workshop below. The space hummed, with purposeful activity, master craftspeople guiding apprentices, tour groups admiring in-progress pieces, designers collaborating on new concepts that balanced tradition with innovation. This vibrant ecosystem had grown from the brink of bankruptcy to become something my mother could never have imagined but would instantly have recognized. A place where craftsmanship was valued not as a relic of the past, but as a living tradition constantly evolving while remaining rooted in fundamental principles of quality, integrity, and purpose. When I'd revealed my silent partnership a year ago, I'd done so out of necessity, to prevent Hamilton from being reduced to a mere brand name slapped on mass-produced furniture. I couldn't have anticipated that the revelation would ultimately lead not to my solo control of the company, but to a more profound reimagining of what Hamilton could become through collaborative leadership. You don't deserve our family business, Victor had declared in that boardroom confrontation that now seemed like a lifetime ago. He had been wrong, but so had I in believing that deserving meant owning and controlling rather than nurturing and evolving. As I gathered my things to join the evening celebrations, I touched my mother's completed jewelry box once more. A tangible reminder that the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones that can be measured in ownership stakes or balance sheets, but in the living traditions and shared purposes that connect one generation to the next. Hamilton Custom Furniture would continue to evolve long after my time at its helm, just as it had evolved from my grandfather's original vision through my parents' stewardship to its current incarnation. My role, our role, was not to freeze it in time, but to ensure it remained true to its essence while finding new expressions for changing times. That understanding was the true resolution of our family conflict, not victory for either sibling, but transcendence of the very notion that legacy was something to be possessed rather than something to be shared, cultivated, and ultimately passed forward, enriched by each generation's unique contribution to its unfolding story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.